Hello, everyone, and welcome to our second Candid Critters in the Classroom webinar. I am your host, Stephanie Shuttler, and I am a scientist on the Candid Critters project and the coordinator for the education program. I am so sorry about our webinar on Monday being rescheduled. We actually had a fire alarm go off at the museum due to a leaky pipe, and we couldn't hold the webinar with the fire alarm going off. So we really apologize about that, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. If this is your first time, this webinar is meant for teachers, but also educators and really anyone who works with kids about how to integrate camera trap research into the classroom. We'll go over lots of tips, and tonight we'll go over lessons plans 3, 4, and 5 for those of you who are getting a continuing education unit for this webinar. Before we begin, though, I want to remind you that we are live, and the reason why we do these webinars live is so that you can ask questions. And so go ahead, as we go through the webinar, type in the comments below your questions, and we'll answer them on air. Before we jump into the lesson plans, a few reminders. If you want to sign up for a continuing education unit, and this is open to any teacher in North Carolina, you don't have to be in grades 5 through 8, it can be in any grade. You can sign up for it, and there's still plenty of time to do that. You only need to do one deployment to do this, plus the lesson plans. All of the requirements are listed on the website, as well as the link on how to sign up for it. A reminder that if you are a teacher of grades 5 through 8, that we are asking you to do a survey with your students. And this survey is extremely important because not only are we conducting research on the mammals, but we're also trying to research the Candid Critters program as a whole and citizen science as a whole. We hear all these great stories from you about how kids make amazing discoveries. For some kids, these programs even change their lives. They want to become scientists afterwards. And we can't evaluate this program based on anecdotes. So we really need some hardcore data. So we really appreciate if you administer the survey, and it's a requirement for the CEU. And if you decide tonight after watching the webinar that Candid Critters isn't right for you, or if it's too much work for you this year and you want to do it next year, we would absolutely love it if your school could serve as a control school. And what this means is that you would not participate in Candid Critters, but you would still administer the surveys to the students. And therefore, we could have some data from schools that do not participate in Candid Critters. And this will allow us to disentangle the effects of the program of Candid Critters from the overall learning achievements that students make throughout the school year. So we would really appreciate it, and just email me. My email's on the first page if you'd like to be a control school. If you have not sent me your principal's information, his or her email address, and this is for the surveys only, just please go ahead and send that to me so I can let your principal know that we are administering these surveys. And before you do the surveys, remember we need those information sheets or consent sheets home to parents. And this is so they can opt their child out of the survey if they hope to do so. Just a couple of clarifications. If you have any questions about Candid Critters as a whole, so questions about libraries or when to pick up a camera trap, those questions go to our Candid Critters coordinator, Lexi Mash. If you have questions about the educational components, the lesson plans, the surveys, the webinars, those questions go to me. And I can also answer scientific questions as well. To remind you, the surveys have to happen before the lesson plans, so there's no mention of the Candid Critters program at all until you do the surveys, and then once you start the surveys, you can begin. The first webinar, in case you missed it, it's on the website, and we discussed the first two lesson plans 1 and 2. Today, we're going over lesson plan 3 with the intention of implementing it on February 16th deployment. But remember, you can implement it on another deployment of your choosing on the Candid Critter schedule. So we're just doing this one here as a model. So feel free to follow along, or if this aligns better with a unit that's coming coming up, say in a month or two, you can do your deployment then. After lesson plan 3, there'll be 3 weeks of wait time while your camera trap is collecting photos. Lesson plan 4 is all about camera trap uploads, and lesson plan 5 is about food chains and food webs using your camera trap photos that you've collected. So let's jump into lesson plan 3. For our continuing education requirements, there are 2 lesson plans that are optional, and this is one of the optional lesson plans. We understand that taking kids outside can be challenging for teachers, especially because classroom sizes now can be really large. You still do have to deploy the camera, so that's not optional, but whether or not you choose to do it with your students is optional. However, us being nature lovers, we really encourage you to take your students outside and set the camera trap up. And we have provided some tips for you. Unfortunately, Greg Amon couldn't be here. He's a teacher at Brentwood Elementary School, and he's been doing Candid Critters for over 2 years in the classroom, and he was going to share some of his own experiences. But basically, the first time he went out alone, and he wouldn't recommend that. Instead, he would recommend asking a parent or another teacher to help out. A lot of you have classrooms that are 30 plus kids, so it's good to have more eyes on everyone. In the last lesson plan, we gave an option to do a faux camera trap as a homework extension. And we think this will work really well for deploying the camera traps as well. Because in addition to having kids outside, it's really hard to crowd around one single camera trap. So by giving them their own camera traps and allowing them to practice with these faux camera traps, we think that will make things run a lot smoother. Greg also suggested giving students jobs too. So it's kind of similar to our habitat audit, but he had students collect data about plants, other non-mammal animals that they found in their environment. So think about assigning them jobs as well. And we have a video posted about how to manage kids outside. That's in the appendix of our lesson plan. And then finally, there's this really cool study that just came out about 3rd graders. And scientists found that after they went outside, they had more focus and engagement in their regular class period after. So not only is going outside good to get them connected to nature, but it also improved engagement in the classroom after. So that's another incentive for you to take your kids outside. And here's some kids in this picture from Broadview Middle School in Alamance. They went behind their school. And actually, when they were out there, the teacher said they were surprised by how quiet it was. They said they've never knew their school was so peaceful. So you don't know what the kids will discover outside. A note about setting camera traps up on school property. We actually rarely have thefts with our camera trap project, but when we do, it does seem to be higher theft on schools. So what I like to tell teachers is to tuck their camera traps away more. Try to hide it a little bit more. So at that same school that I was just talking about, they actually had some camera trap thefts. And I set up a camera trap in addition to the teacher. And the teacher set up the camera trap on a path leading to the pond. Whereas I went off the path and then went in maybe about 20 meters to set up the camera trap. So try to avoid setting the camera traps up on obvious paths or obvious areas where people go. If that's the only location you have to do, at least angle the camera completely away so that people can't see it. And also try to avoid areas where it looks like people have been. So sometimes going behind schools, I've seen where I think kids hang out. You'll see, garbage or water bottles in those areas. And again, try to avoid putting the camera trap there so people don't detect it. So to start for lesson plan 3, or first lesson plan tonight, looks like for lesson plan 3, sorry, I thought we moved on. Lesson plan 3, this is an extension option. This is to create a video. So this is like a homework assignment or another add-on to this activity that students can create a video to share with other classrooms who are thinking about setting up a camera trap. So in this video, it would be good to include students' experiences as well as tips, especially important camera trap protocols like setting the camera trap up at knee height. Okay, lesson plan 4. Lesson plan 4 is all about uploads, and before you involve your class, there's going to be a little bit of prep work. Make sure to download the eMammal software on the laptops or computers that students will be using. And you can do this now because some schools require IT approval to download softwares, and sometimes that takes a while, like a few weeks. So I would recommend doing that now. We also want you to collect the photos before they upload them. I would recommend at least a day ahead of time so it can give you time to copy the photos to the desktop and to scan the photos. Copying the photos, depending on how fast your computer is, might take a little while and how many photos you have. And then also, when working with kids, it is important to scan for inappropriate activity. We can't control what's on the camera traps. Humans are captured on the camera traps, and we cannot control what humans do. So if you're having students upload the photos and don't want them to see anything they're not supposed to, I will show you now how to scan. And we actually have a couple of incidences that happened on Camera Trap. One, we had a Boy Scout troop that had cameras in a state park, and they had some state park visitors moon the camera trap. So a bunch of Boy Scouts got to witness that. And interestingly enough, Camera Trap actually captured somebody with a gun on their school property, and the Camera Trap photos had to be released to the police, and they actually helped solve that crime. So again, we ask you to please scan the photos. So when you're in the eMammal software, this is what it looks like. This is a recent deployment of mine. You can see my mouse here move on the screen. And the way the Camera Trap works is that you'll have a burst of photos. So if the animal triggers the camera, it will take 5 pictures. So here at the top is each trigger. And if you look at those on your screen, you can usually see an animal right away in those. So when I'm looking at my computer screen, I can actually see it in the nighttime photos. There's deer in most of them, and then in the daytime photos, there's heron. And so all you'll do then is just click on these arrows too to take you to the next line of sequences. And again, you just can click on the photos that have humans on them. And then when you click on the photos that have humans on them, so for this, we didn't get any humans until the camera trapper. You can scroll through these photos on the bottom to make sure. So that's all you have to do. You don't have to go through all the animal photos. Just scan through and see if you have human photos and click on those and see if anything happened on the camera trap. So it's pretty easy to do, and it doesn't take that much time at all. In this lesson plan, it's also important to have your deployment sheet because the students will be entering the GPS information from the camera trap and the detection distance, as well as the camera trap number. So make sure you have that information handy for the students. And also, give students note cards at this point, and they will be writing on these note cards a unique species that they find. So every time they have a new species, they'll write one of these species on a different note card, and these cards will be saved for the next lesson plan. At this time, if you don't have your dot plot displayed in your classroom, you should revisit it, and this is when we're going to compare the students' predictions to what they actually got on the camera trap, and you're going to have a discussion about how their expectations met up with what they captured. Did they get what they expected to find, or something completely different? One thing that teachers really worry about is getting no animals. It honestly doesn't happen that much, but sometimes it does happen. But that's part of real science, and that's something that you can emphasize with your students, that finding out where animals aren't is just as important as finding out where they are. Because if there's a lot of deployments in that area and they have also no animals, maybe we can tie that to some sort of variable in the habitat that explains why animals are not found in this location. There's also a degree of randomness and chance too, so you might try for a different location at your school. Just remember it has to be over 200 meters apart. And we found with previous citizen scientists that this actually makes them more excited to run the camera trap, again, because they want to catch animals. So again, no data is still important, and we still need you to upload those photos. One concern that teachers have with uploading photos with kids in the classroom is kind of like the camera trap. It's really hard to have 30 kids all at the same computer. When I'm uploading the photos, I'm working on my computer and I'm doing it by myself or maybe with a partner. But for kids to do this all around at the same computer, it's really hard. So we have a couple of strategies about how to do it in the classroom. These are recommendations. You can do whatever works best for you, but we just want kids seeing the photos. So the first one is you copy the same deployment of photos, so your same SD card of photos, to multiple devices. And students work in small groups and they upload the same set of photos to the same deployment. And for us, this is fine for data because we only receive the last copy of the uploads that go through. So we're not receiving multiple copies of the same photos. We're only seeing one copy. The only downside to this is that with your account, you have a volunteer feedback form at the end. So when you submit your deployment, you'll get an expert review of the number of animals that you got right and just an overall picture of the species on your deployment. So if one student or a group of students identifies the last set that's uploaded, it'll be their identifications and not the class as a whole. So it'll only be one group's animal identifications. The next option is to put the SD card on your computer as a teacher and project it to the whole class, and go through the photos and have the students identify and come to a consensus on which animals and how many are in the sequences. And this is a great way to do it, but it also has some cons. So one of the cons are you want to make sure your projector is good enough. Sometimes, even if you can see the animal photos great on your screen, the projector won't pick up the nuances of an animal dark in the background. And another con with this is depending on what kind of deployment you can get, it might not be engaging. So if you have hundreds of photos of deer, some students might lose interest as you go through the same species over and over again. And it's only one person working the computer, which is usually the teacher too. So students might lose focus or interest using this method as well. And the last method is kind of a combination. Well, it's really a combination of the first one augmented with some group activity. So if you don't have a lot of devices, you can have one computer set up for eMammal, Candid critters, and you can have the students doing another activity. And you can rotate the students in and have them identify a couple of sequences at a time. And this works really well if you have a big sequence of photos. Sometimes we have hundreds of sequences. Or you can have the students go through the entire deployment and recheck other students' answers. So these camera trap photos honestly are tricky, even for experts. There's still species that we can't identify. So having many eyes go over these photos is actually really helpful. And you can even have students write down which ones there are disagreements about. If they have to change a previous student's identification, you can go over it as a class. So that concludes lesson plan 4. For lesson plan 5, we're calling this Connected Critters because it is all about food webs and food chains. And here is where you're going to use the cards that you have the students filled out from the previous activity. So make sure you collect those at the end of the class. And you will only be using one set of students' cards. So you only want one unique species in the card set. And you can either you're going to add more species. You can do this by yourself at home, or you can make this into another classroom activity. But in addition to the mammals, I want you to add non-mammal organisms. So plants, insects, birds, reptiles, any other species that you observe or that know that lives there from the school habitat. And again, one species per card. Then you're going to hand out the cards to the students so that everyone has a card and act out a food chain and food web. And for this lesson plan, you'll need a ball of string or a ball of yarn. And as the teacher, you'll form a circle and you'll start as the sun. And being the sun, you are the source of energy, and you will make a statement about that and then choose a student who represents a producer. So a student who's maybe has a dandelion note card. Then you will say a statement about the relationship between the sun and that student, and hand the string over to the student, or the ball of yarn over to that student after you describe the relationship. Then the student will then choose another student that is the next trophic level up, and they will explain why using terminology that students need to learn for food chains and food webs, and keep going. So they'll stop at the food chain, talk about what a complete food chain is, and then you'll repeat the cycle starting at the sun again to make a food web. And this is a really fun activity. It's been tried out with teachers in the past. And when you're done, you'll stand up, or you'll be standing up, and you can have the students look around and have them discuss the findings. So again, this will only be with the camera trap mammals that you found in your camera trap. So this will provide some great discussion for which mammals aren't there. Schools, unless you're really far east, are not going to have any apex predators. There's no more mountain lions. Actually, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service just declared mountain lions in the east are officially extinct. And there's no gray wolves in this area too. So unless you're in red wolf habitat and are really lucky to get a red wolf on your habitat, there's no true apex predators left. So that's definitely a discussion point you can talk about. You can also add more cards back into that activity to see how the food web changes. And some additional extension options for that are also, we have provided cards as well. So in the appendix, there are cutouts that you can cut out for your classroom. And you can use those cards and do the same exercise again, acting it out with some different North Carolina critters that you maybe didn't capture on your camera traps. And here's an example of teachers using the card. So this is an activity that we did training teachers in the lab. And it's the same sort of scenario. The teachers weren't acting it out, but they used camera trap pictures. These ones actually come from Suriname, and they created their own food web from it. We also have a worksheet so students can make their own food webs as a homework extension. We have a ton of information on food webs and food chains in the supplemental materials and in the appendix. So feel free to check out that and use that information as well. And then finally, before we end with questions, I just want to remind you that I'm more than happy to do a classroom visit. We can do it either in person if you're close enough, or through Skype, and I would be more than happy to talk to your students about being a scientist, about Candid Critters data. So just feel free to reach out to me. I had my email in the beginning of the screen, and just set up a date and time with me. And that concludes everything for this webinar. And now my lovely assistant is going to bring me some questions that we have, and we will answer them. Oh, this is a very good question. I did forget to address this. So somebody asked, if you do find something inappropriate on the camera trap, what should you do with the photos? So what you should do is go into the original folder of the camera trap. So when you take the SD card and put it in your computer, you'll see a folder. And using the eMammal software, you can see the date and time of the photos that are problematic. And then looking in the folder, find that photo. and just delete those photos or remove them. And if it's something that's on your school property and kids that are at your school, you might want to send them to an administrator. Like, so for example, with the firearms incidents, they send it to the police and I'm sure the school administrator, or just completely delete them. But it's really important that you take the full sequence. So if you're using your Econics camera trap, it takes 5 pictures no matter what. So you want to make sure to delete photos 1 through 5, even if there's only inappropriate activity in photos 2 and 3. And this is just so you can avoid questions. So when the students are uploading their photos, if they see with their Econics photos, it'll tell you 1 out of 5 or 2 out of 5. So if they see 1 out of 5, 4 out of 5, and 5 out of 5, they might ask questions. So this is just to prevent them from asking that. But that is a great question. You can just delete the photos from the folder directly. Okay, and it looks like we don't have any more questions live. If you have questions, just feel free to leave them still on the Facebook page, and I will answer them later, or you can email me directly at stephanie.shuttler@gmail.com. And thank you so much for joining us, and I'm really excited to see your camera trap photos.